Hi, my name's Mark. I'm one of the pastors here at Trillium. I have a friend of mine who's got a crusty exterior, kind of a little difficult, a little bit argumentative, a little gruff in nature. People kind of a little intimidated by him. You know somebody like that? Have you ever met someone like that? Are you that person? And I've been thinking, what is that crusty nature all about? I recently came across a survey of the top 10 fears that people have. And the number one was fear of public speaking, fear of death, fear of spiders, all the way down to the number 10, fear of thunder and lightning. That's an impressive list of fears, but I think people's first fear is none of those. I think their first fear is that immense generous nature that lives within inside of them. I think people are really afraid of that part of themselves. I think we keep that part of ourselves locked up inside, lest others discover the truth about us and use it against us. I mean, if your spouse or your kids or your parents or your siblings or neighbors or your work colleagues knew just how generous you were, well, where would that take you? Where would you end up with that? They just run right over you. So we keep it locked away under that kind of gruff, crusty exterior that most of us have, to some extent at least. And we try to forget about it in ourselves too. We don't really want to remember that part of ourselves because we're afraid of where it might take us. Paul was talking to the Corinthian church, and they were kind of a crusty church. There were lots of crusty churches around. They were one of them. And he was using the church north of them in Macedonia as an example of what it meant to be generous in nature. See, a calamity had happened back in Jerusalem, in Judea, a natural disaster. Now, those churches back there were struggling under incredible challenges and difficulties. And the call went out to all the churches in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea for help from the mother church. And now these churches were responding, but some maybe with not a lot of zeal to them. And the Macedonian church had opened their arms, but the Corinthian church, like many others, was keeping their arms tight. They were hiding behind their crusty nature. And Paul was trying to use the story of the Macedonians not to guilt them into being more generous, but to be inspiring them to allow something in them to get expressed outwards. That generous nature that lives within us, the scriptures say, is that a God identity in us. It's God's nature in us. It's part of God's extension to who we are. When we hide it away or we keep it under a crusty exterior, we are, in a sense, shortchanging ourselves. We're missing out on something so incredibly important. And when we allow it to be expressed, unleashed, even just a little bit more than we have in the past, then something powerful takes shape in us. And a blessing moves out through us. And something mysterious and wonderful takes shape in our lives and in the world around us. I think we look around in a world that's starving for generosity and generous expressions. And we're always inspired when we hear those stories and we see them in the news or even told to us by friends. Paul reminds the disciples that to follow Christ is to really embrace that generous nature and allow it to get out, to unshackle, to get free, to open the crack just a little bit wider to that generous expression. He talks about how Jesus was rich and became poor so that we could be rich. And there is our greatest fear. For were we to reenact Jesus' story within our own, we who are rich would become poor so that others might be rich. And where would that leave us? Paul, of course, knows that the story doesn't end there for Jesus or for us. That there is that moment of resurrection that comes, restoration, a promise that life will be given back to us even greater than we could ever imagine. That when that blessing of generosity gets moving in and through us, a resurrection will come that will reveal to us the truth of who we really are. That crusty friend of mine, the one who is difficult and argumentative and challenging to be with, I saw this happen for him. When one of his neighbors became really sick, and all of a sudden, beneath that crusty nature was this incredibly generous, loving heart. That's what he'd been hiding all along. That's what we all hide. And I saw this beautiful expression of love through his care of his neighbor. And I know for sure that that's possible for us too. The Corinthian church, we'll never hear their story in the end, but we do see it revealed and reenacted in our own.